Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Keeley Wilson. I'm the Senior Preventive Conservator for Exhibitions and Loans at the British Museum, and today I would like to speak to you about how the COVID-19 pandemic impacted on the temporary exhibitions, focusing in particular on our Tantra exhibition. The Tantra exhibition was due to open in April 2020 and had been in planning for 2 years prior. Featuring loans from New York, Dublin and Delhi, the exhibition explored the link between the philosophy developed in medieval India and the transformation of the religious, cultural and political landscape of India and beyond. In general, preventive conservation of temporary exhibitions focuses on 5 key areas: relative humidity, showcase and plinth design, light exposure, in-case materials and pest management. Alongside the designated treatment conservator for the exhibition, as well as the collections managers, the preventive conservator also assesses the suitability of mounts and more general logistical aspects of the exhibition, such as access to cases and in-store scheduling. In line with the recommendations of the BESO group, and as part of our commitment to reduce the amount of power required to condition exhibitions, the British Museum uses a 4-band structure to determine the most appropriate conditions for the objects in our shows, as shown on the slide. These are applied to both our own objects and those loaned in for the shows, although of course there is a recognition that specific objects may have unique requirements. Under normal circumstances, the British Museum uses 2 different approaches to conditioning showcases: passive and active. The active method uses a machine to pump conditioned air into the showcase at the appropriate humidity. Normally, this will be a Harnar K2 unit, although we do also use Preservatech Mini 1 machines as shown on the slide if we have larger showcases. The passive methodology uses a desiccant to either buffer humidity fluctuation, for example using Prozorb or Artsorb, or to dry out the environment within the showcase, in the case of Desiclay or silica gel. The preference is always for passive conditioning to be used wherever possible. Not only does this further reduce the energy consumption of the shows, but it also requires less maintenance during the run of the exhibition, and desiccant cannot have a catastrophic failure, which is always a risk with mechanical conditioning. The drawback of passive conditioning is that it relies on the natural air circulation within the showcase, and as a result will only be effective up to a given volume. While there does not appear to be a definitive answer to the maximum effective volume of a desiccant, in general any showcase with an internal volume in excess of 1 metre cubed and requiring environmental conditioning is assigned a machine to achieve this. In addition, the use of desiccant relies on the showcase being relatively well sealed. If the air exchange rate of a given showcase is too high, the desiccant will become exhausted quickly and may need changing before the end of the exhibition run. This can be problematic, as in the vast majority of cases that utilise passive conditioning, the desiccant is hidden under the baseboard of the showcase. This means that changing over the Prozorb cassettes entails fully deinstalling the objects to access the control compartment, which can be particularly tricky if this requires a courier to oversee, and also there is a limited amount of time available when the exhibition is not open to the public. Showcase design is a key variable in determining the type of conditioning that will be most effective and efficient. As previously mentioned, the display volume should be considered, as should the airtightness of the seals. It has been the experience of the British Museum that demountable showcases lose their structural integrity and airtightness over time, particularly as they are constructed and dismantled repeatedly. The cases do still function as a buffer from large fluctuations in the external environment, and with mechanical conditioning they can stay within the 45 to 55% band, but this has led me to the conclusion that these cases are not suitable for objects that require tight environmental controls or conditions too dissimilar from the ambient. In the Tantra exhibition, we had a key loan of 9 palm leaf manuscripts from the Cambridge University Library. These formed an integral part of the exhibition and included one of the oldest known dated Sanskrit manuscripts from Southeast Asia, dated to 828 CE. As you can imagine, these folios are incredibly brittle and vulnerable to losses, and as such needed to be kept at a consistent humidity level for the duration of the exhibition. Of the 9, 8 were conditioned passively, with the remaining folio conditioned by a Harnar K2 unit. The difference to the last palm leaf was due to the larger objects shown alongside. These were displayed in one of the Harnauder demountable systems referenced above. Tantra was in the final snagging stages of the exhibition build when the pandemic struck, and the first lockdown was announced in March 2020. The scheduled installation had already begun, with several of the British Museum's own works in place, including newly conserved tankas and a votive panel of painted wood. We were fortunate that by a coincidence of timing, neither of our temporary exhibition spaces were open at the time of lockdown. Tantra, as I've said, was just beginning the installation process, and we had just finished de-installing Troy, Myth and Reality. This meant we did not have any loaned-in objects in our galleries, which did allow the Preventive team to focus their energies on the permanent collection and the stores. This initial lockdown in March 2020 was definitely the most challenging, as no admission was permitted to the museum estate, and the majority of staff were furloughed at home without access to the IT systems we used to monitor the collections. Although we had been preparing for increased restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic, the relative speed with which the lockdown happened and the unusual circumstances meant we found ourselves in uncharted waters without any precedent to guide us. The closing of the British Museum for an extended period has not happened since the Second World War. Since then, there have been numerous additions and alterations to the building, its services, and our methods of monitoring and controlling the environment. All this combined to give an enormous amount of uncertainty in the behaviour of the environments in the galleries and caused a huge amount of anxiety amongst all the collection's care staff. This was exacerbated by the fact that all non-essential staff, which was defined as anyone apart from security, was banned from entering the museum site and therefore could not carry out the daily, weekly or monthly checks that were part of the collection's care routine. This translated into humidifiers running empty, dehumidifiers filling up, and an increased risk of damage to vulnerable objects. We were very fortunate to be able to pass on some of the routine tasks to our colleagues in security with the help of illustrated instruction manuals to ensure that the most susceptible materials were maintained as close to their normal environment as possible. With the lifting of the lockdown in early August, collections care staff began to return to the museum site. As a key part of the museum's income generation, the temporary exhibition programme was identified as one of the core activities that would be started up prior to reopening to the general public. It had been decided that the exhibition programme would in effect pick up where it had left off. With the kind cooperation of our lenders, Tantra was moved from our main summer slot to the autumn and winter of 2020. This shift in dates clearly caused logistical issues, but also impacted on the preventive conservation aspects of the exhibition. Summer shows in London frequently have to contend with high temperatures, sudden downpours, and high levels of humidity, all of which can transfer through to exhibition spaces. With the new dates of September 2020 to January 2021, the external environment was far more likely to be cold with low humidity levels, which would be naturally exacerbated by comfort heating in the galleries. In addition, new COVID-19 regulations meant that the museum had to increase the fresh air ventilation throughout the public spaces. Where possible, this was done by altering settings on our air handling systems, but in some of the older parts of the building, the only options were to open windows and doors and strategically position fans to improve air circulation. As with the full close down earlier in the year, we did not know how this would impact on the RH levels in different parts of the building. The Ho Tung Exhibition Gallery, also known as Gallery 35, where Tantra was held, is in the centre of the Great Court of the British Museum on the first floor. In order to improve ventilation, as well as to reduce potential touch points for visitors, we decided to trial leaving the doors to the gallery open. While this would undoubtedly have an impact on the ambient environment in the space, I felt that the objects on open display were robust enough to be able to withstand any additional fluctuations, and also recognise the importance of making the exhibition as accessible and comfortable as possible for our visitors. I utilised the time period of object installation to gather data on the impact of the additional ventilation, and this has shown that for the month of August, the humidity was within the target band of 40 to 60% for 96% of the time. From the historic data, Gallery 35 is on average within the RH band for 88% of the time in August. This improvement is interesting, but it could easily be attributed to other factors other than the ventilation. For example, traditionally the exhibition space would be open to the public for August, and the increased number of bodies in an enclosed space would be expected to result in an increase in RH. This is in contrast with the Tantra installation, where the doors were open at all times during work hours, and the number of people permitted in the gallery space was strictly controlled in order to operate in a COVID-safe manner. Having said that, the data did enable me to say with confidence that the risk to the objects on display would be minimal from the increased ventilation, and this was confirmed by monitoring throughout the exhibition's run. So in addition to the changes to our standard operating procedures, we had to prepare for the possibility that there may be additional close downs and that we might not be able to access the objects or equipment for an extended period of time. We therefore had to take the opportunity and the lessons learned from the first lockdown to make sure we were as prepared as possible for any future interruptions to the programme. In order to achieve this, we made a number of assumptions. We may not be able to access the galleries in the event of a second lockdown. The length of the lockdown would be indeterminate. We may not get much notice of a lockdown beginning, and communication with lenders may be difficult in the immediate aftermath of an announcement. From this scenario, the first decision that needed to be made was whether to leave objects in situ in the showcases or remove them to the stores in the event of another lockdown. As the Tantra exhibition contained human remains, we knew that we would have to remove at least those items to the dedicated store, and so there would be an opportunity to move select other objects if it was deemed necessary. The preference is always to avoid moving objects unnecessarily, and this is particularly true in the case of objects on loan from another institution. From our experience with the first lockdown, I was able to identify that the passively conditioned cases would be very low risk for the contents, and so I decided that those cases could be left in situ. The active conditioning was a trickier prospect. The RK2 units need to be maintained weekly to ensure they have an appropriate level of water in their reservoir, and we were aware that this may not be feasible under lockdown conditions. I'm also aware that leaving RK2 units to run dry may in fact result in more issues with the machines in the long run, as well as unpredictable behaviour in the short term. The simplest approach, and one that we did take in select permanent galleries, was to turn off the machine and rely on the buffering of the showcases. The ambient environment was also shown to be more stable during periods of lockdown, as would be expected with fewer people accessing the galleries and less air movement, and this would help with reducing the fluctuations in the showcases. The Hotang Exhibition Gallery, however, does benefit from a full air handling system. This complicates the matter somewhat, as in the event of another full lockdown, the system would be left running but would not be able to be maintained. While the HVAC is generally reliable, it is not unheard of for mechanical issues to occur, which can have an unpredictable impact on the humidity and temperature levels in the gallery. This led me to make the decision that in the event of another lockdown, we would move the 9th palm leaf manuscript to one of the other passively controlled cases, as I felt this was a more stable and sustainable approach for the object. This was agreed with the lenders, and it was carried out for the second and third lockdowns. So let's see the data. The notes on the bottom of the graph are consistent across all of the following slides. Number 1 is the object install, 2 is the second lockdown, 3 is the second lockdown ending, 4 is London going into Tier 4, which is effectively another lockdown, and 5 was the deinstallation of the exhibition. Showcase 1, shown on the screen, is passively controlled, and you can see that it holds level and steady throughout the exhibition. Showcase 4 is passively controlled as well, and experienced a slow, steady decrease in humidity throughout the exhibition, but remained within the parameters required for the safe display of the palm leaves. By contrast, Showcase 13 shows far more fluctuation in the humidity readings. This case was controlled by one RK2 unit, and while it functioned well up until the second lockdown, this stability was never quite regained upon reactivation. Again, this serves to highlight the temperamental nature of mechanical conditioning and has further convinced me that active conditioning should only be used when absolutely needed, along with concerns around sustainability and design limitations when using lots of machinery. So finally, the future work based on this will be formalising the procedures and policies for any future lockdowns, including identification of vulnerable objects and prior agreement with lenders for any actions to be taken. I'm carrying out further monitoring of unconditioned and passively conditioned cases in the exhibition galleries, with a view to the feasibility of further reducing mechanical conditioning where possible. I'm also keen to produce a method of quantifying the stability of showcase environments to allow for objective assessment of performance. Thank you very much.